Senator Roberts, you have the call.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. Why? That's one question that I want to ask repeatedly in this speech. I see the government's changes as a welcome step, but it's a tiny, tiny step and needs many, many more. Could be one of my footprints, Senator Ayres. We see the government's previous tax changes. They weren't cuts, they were changes. And we will see the government, as a result of those changes, increase revenue by about $38 billion over the next 4 years. So much for tax cuts. They're tax changes that lead to an increase in tax for mums and dads. Why are politicians scared of tax reform, and why do they place the burden on families and individuals to pay tax and let multinationals off the hook? Why are people scared? Why are politicians scared of tax reform and then continue tinkering with the system to affect mums and dads, and who end up paying by far the lion's share of tax in this country? Why did Senator Sharma, in a very good speech, say that he wants to end bracket creep, and the Liberals want to end bracket creep, yet 3 weeks earlier they voted against ending bracket creep with my amendment? And they want enduring bracket creep. Why did the Labor Party say they want to, as Senator Gallagher spoke at the time, I remember, she said, we want to end bracket creep, but we vote against it. Vote against it. So that my amendment to abolish bracket creep once and for all was defeated. Why is taxation not transparent? I'll tell you why. So governments can continue stealing money from families to pay for their uncosted bribes. This place, this Senate and the House of Representatives have turned into auction blocks using taxpayers' money to buy votes. That's what they've turned into. That's how the governance of this country works under the Uni-Party, Labor and Liberal. Why is the Uni-Party looking for new ways to tax people? Cars, utes, foundations for tradies now going to be taxed. Clothing is going to be taxed under the Labor Party. Food, with a new biosecurity levy, is going to be taxed. Inflation, that was caused by the Labor Party, Liberal Party, Uni-Party during the COVID response, the COVID mismanagement, state premiers largely Labor, federal Prime Minister Liberal, National. Inflation is a tax especially on the poor and the low income. Inflation is a huge tax burden. Greenwashing, requiring corporations to buy carbon dioxide credits. And where do they pass the prices on to? They pass it on to prices, higher prices. Why? Why do they require diversity, equity and inclusiveness and ESG reporting that are ridiculous and unfounded? No one's provided the evidence for that basis of that policy. It's a compliance tax, and where will the cost of that compliance tax go? Onto things that mums and dads pay for, that families pay for. Whole departments are created in corporations, and that adds to prices families pay. Why more tinkering, more complexity, less productivity? And think about the behaviours this drives with regard to allocation of resources and the behaviour of executives and decision-makers. Why is it that every problem in this country comes out of this building? Everyone. Housing, excess immigration, putting in human catastrophic pressures on people now. People living in tents, cars, caravans, out in the street, under bridges. In Brisbane, one of the richest states in the world. In our regional cities, right up and down the east coast of Queensland. A long coast it is. The Murray-Darling Basin, a disaster. Climate fraud, a lie, a scam, a hoax. Stealing farmers' property rights. The Liberal National Party government doing that in 1997 to 2007. COVID mismanagement that we're still living with. I had a gentleman in my office today, vaccine injured, stated by doctors. We had to turn the lights off because of the glare. He couldn't look straight to the windows, he had to look down. Vibrant, healthy person, COVID, vaccine damage, almost incapacitated, a lively human being now pulled up. We're still living with the COVID mismanagement. Inflation from the money supply, as I mentioned. Inflation from crippling the supply chains during the COVID restrictions, crippling our supply chains, leading to higher prices. And then I got a call.
Senator Billick, are you raising
for 5 minutes? I just wonder if you could. Sorry, I'm just wondering if you could draw to the attention.
I'm sorry,
of
Senator. Are you raising a point of
I
order?
am.
What's
point
your
of
point
order.
of order?
Relevance. We're here to speak about the Treasury Law Amendment Bill. Not once has the senator mentioned anything to do with that bill, and it's been 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. I will remind the senator of the topic, but as you know and other senators know, it's a broad-ranging debate. Senator Roberts, you have the call.
For those senators with poor hearing, let me say again, we support this bill. That's what I opened with. We support this bill. I'll repeat it. I said that. So I've just laid down a litany of problems that are coming from this building in betrayal of the people of this country, my fellow Australians. And I'm now getting to the point of that betrayal. The most destructive system in government under the Uni Party for the last 70 years has been the taxation system. It focuses our brightest and best people, some of our lawyers, some of our accountants, not on serving our country in competition with foreign companies overseas, the Koreans, the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Chinese, the Europeans, the Americans, but on screwing the government, getting away from complex, ridiculous taxation systems, not on competing with foreign-owned corporations, but on competing with our government. Think of the behaviours that are driven at corporate level, the allocation of resources, the inefficiency of resources, the behaviour of executives. And taxation is highly, highly complex. How many pages in our Taxation Act? Highly inefficient, directly in terms of allocation of resources and indirectly in terms of the behaviours that are driven. And indirectly and directly in terms of the way taxation is levied in this country. James Killaley was the former Deputy Commissioner of Taxation in charge of large companies and foreign matters. He said in 1996 and 2010, 90% of Australia's large companies are foreign-owned and since 1953 have paid little or no tax. Now this bill does go a little way to addressing that, but we need to really address it full on. So why does that happen? Why are our foreign companies getting off the hook? I'll tell you why. Because many of our large, even Australian companies, are part-owned and controlled by foreign corporations, the major predators, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, First Street. They own the four banks. They own 10% of the four banks combined, and they own the controlling interest. They tell the banks what to do. BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, First State, and others in that little cohort of multinational predatory organisations. We don't have four banks, main banks. We have one main bank hiding behind four logos. That's what we have. Same policies, same principles, same strategies, same products, same services. Coles and Woolies, again, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Go right through our corporations in this country, the corporations we thought are Australian-owned, foreign-owned and controlled. And where does the money go? The profit goes overseas. And what did the Morrison government do, along with the state premiers? Loaded it up so that the foreign multinationals and owning the large companies in this country made a killing out of COVID at the expense of small companies and small businesses. On the other hand, look at Qatar and Norway. Bountiful natural resources, just like us. Not as much as we have, in fact, yet they make so much more. Qatar made $78 billion out of its gas exports. We export more, and we made a fraction, a tiny, tiny fraction of that, around 1% of that. So why are we doing this? Well, past attempts at comprehensive tax reform, which is what I'm saying, and I have been saying for many, many years, ever since I got into the Senate, we need comprehensive tax reform, proper tax reform, honest tax reform. Well, let's have a look at the person who introduced GST into this country, Paul Keating, then Treasurer and I think Deputy Prime Minister under Bob Hawke. He came so close to introducing the GST, and at the last minute the Prime Minister at the time, Bob Hawke, fell over and lacked the courage to do so. So Paul Keating was very upset with that. A few years later, John Hewson introduced the GST as part of Liberal Party policy. And who smashed him over it? Paul Keating. the man who introduced the concept of GST to this country.
Senator Roberts, I will remind you to use people's correct titles and when
Former
Prime Minister.
Former Treasurer at the time. So what I'm saying is that the taxation system was mooted for change, and the person who introduced the GST actually smashed the GST for pure political reasons. Another aspect of comprehensive tax reform, Treasurer Peter Costello, who has been admired as a Treasurer. When he found out Senator Hanson, at the time Pauline Hanson from the lower house, was keen on the transaction tax, as a way of destroying her, trying to destroy her, he destroyed the transaction tax, even though he had previously said publicly that it was worth it had a lot of merit. The point I'm getting to is taxation has become a political football. It's not an honest debate anymore. It's about smashing a system. So what I propose is that instead of proposing a system, we look at basic principles. We first of all agree that the taxation system is one of the most destructive systems in this country, if not the most destructive, as I have in my opinion. But then once we get agreement on that, we then put forward a set of principles that we can agree on. I've been putting some thought to principles. First of all, a fair, efficient and honest taxation system would enable us to receive far more income because the multinationals would be paying their fair share of tax. Fair and equitable to all people and to all economic entities, including Australian businesses, and with no exemptions for foreign companies, which are now largely exempt. Making foreign companies and speculators pay their fair share of tax would quickly end the budget deficit and end overseas debt and fund future infrastructure without borrowing. Second principle, it's in the national interest. Third principle, and this is very, very important for our country and the reason why I went through the problems that are coming from this building. Incorruptible and impossible for politicians to fiddle with. A major source of political power is the ability of politicians to make legislation that punishes or advantages particular groups. This ability gives politicians from the Uni Party enormous power over others by enacting, for example, taxation provisions that assist their supporters or hurt their supporters' competitors. An honest tax system removes this blatant power and abuse of power. Fourth principle, complies with and supports our Constitution's intent and written provisions, not contradicts our Constitution, complies with it. Fifth principle, simplicity and understanding, administration and accountability. Completely transparent, unlike the current taxation system, which is deliberately opaque. There's an objective basis for levying tax. Instead of assessing tax on profit and loss that can be fiddled, use objective measures. These do exist and include, for example, market sale price or straight-out unit cost. The taxation system needs to be constructive, not punitive. It needs to be efficient to administer with low administration costs, not the unwieldy behemoth that's administering or mismanaging tax at the moment. It increases people's purchasing power. A good taxation system, an efficient taxation system, will increase people's purchasing power so people are economically far better off because the burden will be shifted more towards multinationals. Next principle, minimal disruption to the economy with no ability for politicians to manipulate the tax system across industry sectors or industry groups. The taxation system could be a wonderful way of getting aggregate economic data and detailed data. Next principle, and arguably one of the most important, accountability. When a properly designed tax system develops accountability in the government and in the people through being a restraint on the cost of government. Taxes are necessary to pay for the cost of government. But what happens at the moment, because politicians from the Uni Party can ratchet it up freely, they tend to abuse it and neglect their accountability to the people for managing costs. Politicians will have to manage within the country's means. Next principle, help people to become independent of government. What I want to do in wrapping up is say again to the senators who didn't hear me in my opening comments, we support this bill, but it is far too little. So why is it too little? We have got plenty of money in this country for investment. We have got super funds holding enormous sacks of gold and rivers of gold. What I'm asking the government to do is to change your ways, to put families before large foreign multinationals, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, First State. Put national interest before large foreign multinationals. put the national sovereignty, reclaim our national sovereignty and put it before large foreign multinationals. Put Australia and Australians first. I asked the question at the start, why? I ask the question now, why not?